My family worshipped my sister, Serafina, like a saint. They treated me, Isabella, like an afterthought. So at Thanksgiving, I revealed I was a multimillionaire who secretly owned their home. The fallout was biblical. My sister threw her wine, my mother collapsed, and my dad just whispered, "You lied to us." This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of roasting turkey and my mother's famous and famously dry sage stuffing usually filled me with a mild, predictable sense of dread. But this Thanksgiving, the dread was sharp. It wasn't just the impending family performance. I was also physically ill, running a low-grade fever and fighting a sinus infection that made my whole head feel like it was packed in cotton. I just wanted to be home, in my own quiet apartment, with a cup of tea and my cat. Instead, I was here in my childhood home, playing my designated role. Isabella, the reliable, boring, and utterly invisible older daughter. My sister, Serafina, was holding court at the dining table, her hands gesturing gracefully as she described her latest mission. Sira was the family saint. At 41, she ran a small nonprofit for. Well, the specifics were always vague. It was always about humanitarian efforts and raising awareness, accompanied by beautifully filtered photos on her social media. And the gratitude in their eyes, Mom, Sira was saying, her voice catching with practiced emotion. It feeds my soul in a way money never could. Oh, Sira, you're just too good, my mother, Rachel, breathed, clasping her hands over her heart. My father, Matthew, nodded, his eyes glistening with pride. Our little saint. I quietly nursed my glass of water, the antibiotics in my system making me feel fuzzy and detached. I had just driven 4 hours, straight from closing a major acquisition deal for my company, to be here. I hadn't slept in 36 hours, and the low thrum of my fever was making the room sway. Isabella, dear, you're quiet, my mother said, finally noticing me. Her gaze was cursory. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit peaky. Before I could answer, Sira cut in, her tone light and airy. She's probably just tired from packing her little boxes. My family believed I sold old books online. That was the simplified, slightly pathetic narrative they had settled on years ago. It started as a hobby in my 20s, restoring antique books. It had since grown into a multi-million-dollar e-commerce business, Archival Preservation, Inc., the leading online supplier of archival quality materials and rare book restoration services in the country. My family, however, had never once asked for a detail. They didn't know the name of my company, the number of people I employed, or the fact that I had just acquired my largest competitor. To them, I was just Izzy, puttering around with old paper. Something like that, I murmured, pressing my cool glass to my temple. Well, my mother said, turning back to her golden child, we must all support Sira. Her work is so important. The support was the real reason for this year's tension. My parents were retired. My father's pension was modest, and my mother had been a homemaker. Their finances, I knew, were tight, and Sira's soul-feeding work was a notorious black hole for money. Then the performance began. Sira's eyes filled with tears. That's actually what I need to talk to you all about. She took a shaky breath. We have a chance to secure a new grant, a huge one, but it requires matching funds. We need to raise $50,000 by the end of the year, or we might have to close our doors. A lead weight settled in my stomach. I saw the immediate, panicked look that passed between my parents. My mother's face went pale. "Oh, Sira," Rachel whispered, her hand flying to her throat. 50,000, my father repeated, his voice strained. "Honey, that's a lot." "I know," Sira cried, the tears now flowing freely. "I've given everything to this. My whole life. I don't take a salary, you know that. I live on nothing. It's just, I can't let these people down." This was the hook, the guilt, the emotional blackmail. I watched, detached by my fever, as my mother and father exchanged another look, this one filled with a quiet, sickening despair. And then my mother did something that broke through my fuzzy detachment. She turned to me, not to Sira, the saint, not to my father, the patriarch, to me. "Isabella," she said, her voice tight and unfamiliar, we have a problem." My father cleared his throat, unable to look at me. "Rachel, not now, it's Thanksgiving." "No, Matthew, she needs to know, we all do." My mother's eyes bored into me, and for the first time I saw not just dismissal, but raw, unfiltered panic. "Your father and we're in some trouble, dear, with the house." My head snapped up. "What kind of trouble?" Sira sniffled, wiping her eyes. "Oh, Mom, don't. This is my burden." "It's all of our burdens now," Rachel snapped, her patience finally cracking. She looked back at me, her expression hardening. We took out a second mortgage, a few years ago, to help Sira with her startup funds for the nonprofit." I felt the blood drain from my face, the fever suddenly replaced by an icy chill. And we've missed a few payments," my father mumbled, staring at his plate. "The bank, they're not being very understanding." My mother's gaze was sharp, pleading, and demanding all at once. They're talking about foreclosure, Isabella." Silence. The only sound was Sira's delicate sniffling. My mother, my father, and my saintly sister all stared at me, the hobbyist, the reliable one. The expectation hung in the air, suffocating. They weren't just telling me, they were asking. They expected me to fix it. They expected me to drain my little online savings, to clean up the mess their golden child had made. I looked from my mother's desperate face to my father's ashamed one, and finally to my sister, who was already composing her features into a mask of tragic, beautiful martyrdom. The betrayal wasn't the financial recklessness. It wasn't even the years of being overlooked. The betrayal was this moment, the realization that my only value to them was as a last resort ATM. My throat was dry, my head pounding. I set my glass down with a quiet click. "I see." The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of a simple sinus infection. It was the diagnosis of a rot that had been festering in my family for decades, and I had just been handed the bill. The dinner that followed was a surreal performance of denial. My mother, having dropped the bomb of financial ruin, immediately began bustling about, insisting everyone have more turkey. "Eat, eat. We can't let this good food go to waste. We'll discuss that later." My father, Matthew, retreated into a shell of forced joviality, asking me painfully stilted questions about the drive up, about the weather, about anything other than the foreclosure notice that was metaphorically sitting on the table next to the gravy boat. Sira, however, seemed to recover with astonishing speed. The tears vanished, replaced by a beatific calm, as if the confession of her need and our parents' subsequent problem had absolved her of all responsibility. She was the noble cause, they were simply the vessels for her work. The consequences were mundane details beneath her notice. I, on the other hand, felt like I was vibrating. The fever, the exhaustion, and the raw anger were a toxic cocktail in my veins. I picked at my food, the taste of ash in my mouth. After dinner, my mother cornered me in the kitchen as I was trying to rinse my plate. "Isabella, I know that was a shock," she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if we were discussing a surprise party, not financial devastation. "A shock, Mom. You're being foreclosed on," I said, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. She flinched. "We just need a little help to get us through. A bridge loan. Just until Sierra lands that big grant, you see, then she can pay it all back." I turned to look at her, really look at her. At 67, Rachel was still a handsome woman, but now the lines of stress around her mouth and eyes were impossible to ignore. She had poured her entire identity into her saintly daughter, and the cracks were showing. "You really believe that, don't you?" I asked. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Serafina's work is important," she hissed, her loyalty flashing like a shield. "It's not like your little shop. This is the real world. This is about helping people." "My little shop pays my mortgage, Mom. It pays my taxes and funds my retirement. What does Sierra's work do?" "You've always been so materialistic, Isabella," she snapped. "So transactional. This is about family. Your father and I, we've supported you." "You've supported me?" I almost laughed. "When? When you told me to get a real job instead of starting my business. When you forgot the name of my company for the 5th time. Or when you asked me if my website makes, any money at Christmas last year." "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, my voice dropping, "is that you've allowed her to drain you dry. And now you're coming to me to plug the hole." She recoiled, her face a mask of indignation. "I'm your mother. This is your home. Are you really going to let us be thrown out on the street because you're jealous of your sister?" The accusation hung in the air, stinging. Jealous. That was the weapon they always used. For years, any flicker of frustration I showed was dismissed as simple jealousy of Sierra's passion and beauty. It had never occurred to them that I wasn't jealous. I was disgusted. "I need to get some air," I said, pushing past her. My head was pounding, and I could feel the fever climbing. I retreated to the sunroom, the one place in the house that was quiet, and sank onto the old wicker couch. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I didn't call my lawyer. I didn't call my accountant. Not yet. I called the one person in my family who had ever seen me clearly. My Aunt Clara, my father's sister. She was the black sheep, the one who had moved across the country and abandoned the family 50 years ago. She was also a retired forensic accountant. "Izzy," her voice crackled over the line, sharp and clear. "You don't call on Thanksgiving unless the sky is falling. What's wrong?" I told her everything, the nonprofit, the matching grant, the second mortgage, the foreclosure. She was silent for a long moment. "Rachel and Matthew," she finally sighed, "are glorious, proud fools, and Serafina, well, that apple didn't just fall from the tree, it rotted on the branch." "I don't know what to do, Aunt Clara. I'm so angry I can't even think straight." "Good," she said, her voice turning crisp and professional. "Use it, but don't use it now. You're sick, you're tired, and you're in their territory. Go home, rest. And when you get back, you're going to pull a thread. What's the name of this nonprofit?" I told her. I could hear her typing. "Got it," she said. "Public record. Oh, this is messy, Izzy. Good, messy is good. Now you listen to me, your parents and your sister. They've forgotten something. They've been so busy looking at the saint, they forgot all about the accountant. I'm not an accountant, Aunt Clara. I restore books. Don't be dense, she snapped, but not unkindly. You built a 7-figure business from scratch. You manage inventory, payroll, international shipping, and acquisitions. Sierra knows how to post a picture on Instagram and cry on cue. You know how to read a balance sheet. They have forgotten one crucial thing. What's that? I whispered, the anger beginning to cool, replaced by something else. Something cold and sharp. They've forgotten you're smart. They've forgotten you're the one with the real power. They think you're the help. It's time to remind them you're the one who owns the bank. We spoke for another 10 minutes, formulating a plan. A quiet investigation. A strategy. When I hung up, my hands were steady. My fever hadn't broken, but the mental fog was gone. I walked back into the living room. Sierra was showing my parents a slideshow of her work on the television. Pictures of her smiling, handing a bottle of water to a child. Pictures of her painting a wall. "Oh, Isabella," my father said, looking up, his face still etched with worry. Are you thinking about what we discussed?" "I am, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, my resolve hardening. I looked at the three of them, my deluded, enabling father, my manipulative, desperate mother, and my parasitic, saintly sister. They had forgotten who I was. They had spent my entire life underestimating me, dismissing me, and relegating me to the sidelines. They've forgotten you're smart. My internal thought, my new mantra, settled into place. They were about to get a very expensive education. My devotion to my family, or rather the idea of my family, had been a long and painful habit to break. I was the fixer, the responsible one. When I was 15, I was the one who balanced my mother's checkbook. When I was 22, I was the one who co-signed Sierra's first car loan, a loan I ended up paying off myself after she forgot the payments, too busy finding herself. My business was born from that same sense of responsibility. I had loved the quiet, meticulous work of bookbinding. It was a skill I'd taught myself in the college library, hiding from the world. When I graduated, I needed a way to pay off my student loans and the default on Sierra's car. I started Isabella's Restorations from a corner of my tiny apartment. I worked 18-hour days. I reinvested every penny. I remember the day I landed my first major institutional client, a university library that needed their entire rare manuscript collection digitized and rehoused. It was a 6-figure contract. I called my parents, bursting with pride. That's wonderful, dear," my mother, Rachel, had said, her voice distracted. "Oh, listen, I have to call you back. Your sister is on the other line. She's in Costa Rica. Yes, building a school. Isn't that amazing? She just has the biggest heart." She'd hung up before I could say another word. That was the day I stopped sharing. It wasn't a lie. It was a cessation of effort. My successes became mine alone. My little online shop grew into Archival Preservation, Inc. I diversified from services to products, manufacturing my own line of acid-free e-boxes, archival-grade tissues, and specialized tools. I became the go-to supplier for universities, museums, and private collectors worldwide. And as my net worth climbed into the 7, then 8-figure range, my family's image of me remained stubbornly fixed. Izzy, the quiet one with the book hobby. Now, back in my own apartment, the fever broken, I dove into the investigation with the same meticulous focus I gave to a 17th century manuscript. Aunt Clara had been right. It was messy. Serafina's nonprofit, the Global Hearth Initiative, was a masterclass in performative charity. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional I'd used before for high-level corporate due diligence. Within 48 hours, I had the first report. The initiative was, for all legal purposes, a shell. It had a glossy website, a rented mailbox, and almost no actual charitable output. The 990 tax forms, which Aunt Clara had pulled herself, were a joke. Over 85% of its expenses went to administrative costs, consulting fees, and travel. Consulting fees, the PI confirmed, were paid almost exclusively to a Serafina Consulting LLC. And the travel budget, well, let's just say her Instagram feed of five-star resorts in humanitarian zones wasn't an exaggeration. Sierra wasn't just bad at running a nonprofit, she was actively, brilliantly fraudulent. She was laundering our parents' retirement money to fund her lifestyle, all under the halo of sainthood. The PI dug deeper. The matching grant she was so desperately seeking, it didn't exist. The organization she'd named had no record of her application. It was a fiction, a ticking clock designed to squeeze the last drops of cash from our parents. The worse it got, the calmer I became. The years of hurt and anger solidified into a cold, hard resolve. The final piece of the puzzle was the house. I contacted my own corporate lawyer and had him quietly inquire with the bank. The situation was worse than my parents had let on. They weren't just missing a few payments. They were in default on a predatory, high-interest second mortgage. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for the end of January. They had less than 60 days. My mother called me every other day. "Have you thought about it, Isabella? We just need a little help. Your father is so stressed, he's not sleeping." "I'm looking into my finances, Mom," I'd reply, my voice perfectly neutral. "Well, don't look too long," she'd snap. "This is urgent. It's not like you have a real corporation to run. Just sell some of your stock or whatever it is you have." Her condescension was so automatic, so deeply ingrained that it no longer even stung. It was just information. "I'll see what I can do," I'd say and hang up. Then I made my move. I didn't see what I could do. I did it. I didn't help. I took control. Through a shell corporation my lawyer set up, I contacted the bank's asset division. I didn't offer to pay the arrears. I offered to buy the entire mortgage note, outright, in cash. To a bank, a non-performing loan is a liability. An all-cash offer to take it off their books, just pennies below the full value, is a gift. The deal was done in 3 days. As of December 14th, I, through AP Holdings LLC, was the new lien holder on my parents' home. They were no longer in debt to the bank. They were in debt to me. I held the file in my hands, the original loan documents, the default notices, and the final signed transfer of the note. My name, or rather my company's name, was on the deed of trust. I now had every legal right to evict them. I thought about the years of being dismissed. I thought about Sierra, with her fake tears and luxury mission trips. I thought about my mother's casual cruelty and my father's weak enabling. They had built their entire family dynamic on a lie. That Sierra was the sun, and I was a dim, distant moon. They had no idea that I was the one who controlled the gravity. "They've forgotten you're smart." I tucked the file into my briefcase. I had the PICE report, I had the tax forms, and I had the deed. Christmas that year was a quiet affair. I sent my regrets, claiming a sudden, urgent inventory issue at my warehouse. My mother was furious. "You're prioritizing boxes over your family when we're in this crisis." "The business needs me, Mom," I said. "I'll see you in the new year." The trap was set. The leverage was in place. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The confrontation wasn't going to be at Christmas. It was going to be on my terms. I needed a bigger stage, a family event where everyone was present. A New Year's Day family crisis dinner was set. They were desperate. The end-of-year deadline for Sierra's grant had passed. The foreclosure date was looming. This was it, the moment of reckoning. The first of the year arrived with a cold, biting wind that rattled the old windows of my parents' home. The mood inside was just as frigid. This wasn't a celebration, it was a summit. My parents, Rachel and Matthew, looked haggard. Sierra, by contrast, looked artfully tragic, dressed in a flowing white sweater that enhanced her saintly aura. She was the beautiful martyr, bravely facing the consequences of her selfless heart. "Thank you for coming, Isabella," my father said, his voice heavy. He was trying to take charge, but he just looked defeated. We have to make a decision." The bank was not receptive to another extension, my mother said, her voice brittle. "They sent another letter. It's final." "And the grant," Sierra interjected, her voice a tragic whisper. "It fell through. They gave it to someone else after all my work." She dabbed her eye, a perfect, glistening tear rolling down her cheek. The PI report in my briefcase felt like a lead weight. It fell through because it never existed. "So," my mother said, turning to me, the calculated desperation back in her eyes. "Here we are, Isabella. This is your family. This is your home. We've calculated what we need to stop the proceedings." She slid a piece of paper across the dining room table. It was a number. The full, outstanding balance of the second mortgage, plus penalties and fees. It was a staggering amount. An amount they knew a hobbyist could never possess. It wasn't a request, it was a test. A test of my love, my duty, and in their minds, my subservience. This was the turning point. The moment the passive victim becomes the active strategist. The years of swallowing my pride, of nodding and accepting their narrative, were over. I looked at the number. I looked at my mother's hard, expectant face. I looked at my father's pleading one. And I looked at my sister, who was watching me with a strange, cool detachment, as if she were a queen observing a peasant being asked for tribute. "No," I said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone. "What?" my mother whispered, her face tightening. "No," I repeated, my voice calm and clear. "I will not be paying that." "Isabella," my father gasped, sitting bolt upright. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Dad. I understand that you and Mom took out a predatory loan to fund Sierra's work. I understand that she has produced nothing, that this nonprofit has been a black hole for your retirement, and that you are now, as a result, losing your home. I understand it all." Sierra's eyes flashed. "How dare you? You know nothing of my work. You sit in your dusty little room with your books." "My dusty little room?" I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "Sierra, I know the name of your consulting firm. I know what percentage of your donations goes to your travel. And I know all about the 5-star resort you stayed at in Bali for your awareness campaign." The color drained from Serafina's face. Her composure, so perfectly crafted, shattered in an instant. You're lying, you're spying on me. It's Cal. Led due diligence, Sierra, I said. It's what people do before they invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into something. It's a shame Mom and Dad never thought to do it. My mother, Rachel, was on her feet. You witch, you've always been jealous of her. Always. Now, when we are begging you for help, you throw this filth at her. It's not filth, Mom. It's the 990 tax forms. They're public record. This was the first strategic reveal. I hadn't even opened my briefcase yet. This was just a warning shot. Sierra's reaction was exactly what Aunt Clara had predicted. She didn't defend her work. She didn't offer to show us the real books. She lashed out. "You're trying to destroy me," she shrieked, her face contorting. "You're trying to turn them against me because you're a bitter, childless old maid who has nothing in her life but money. The money card, the one they always assumed I didn't have, but now accused me of hoarding." "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I do have money, and I am bitter, but I'm not the one who destroyed this family's finances. You did." "Get out," my mother screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of this house. If you won't help us, you are not welcome here." "Mom," my father said, his voice weak. "Rachel, please." "No, I want her gone. She is not our daughter." I stood up slowly. I picked up my coat and my briefcase. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. This was the moment. "You're right, Mom," I said, walking to the door. "I won't help you." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "And you're right to be worried about the house. The bank has been completely unresponsive to your calls." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and rage. "It's funny how that happens," I said, a cold, thin smile touching my lips. "They haven't been taking your calls because the asset is no longer on their books." My father's brows furrowed. What does that mean?" I looked at all three of them, one by one, the enabler, the martyr, the matriarch. "It means, Mom, that you can't kick me out of this house." I turned the deadbolt, the click echoing in the sudden, tomb-like silence. "Because as of 3 weeks ago, I own it." The trap was sprung, the investigation was over, the confrontation was about to begin. The silence that followed my announcement was heavier and more absolute than any I had ever experienced. It was as if I had sucked all the air out of the room. My mother, Rachel, stood frozen, her hand still pointing at the door, her face a mask of utter disbelief. My father, Matthew, just sank back into his chair, his eyes wide and vacant, as if he couldn't process the words. And Serafina, her reaction was the most telling. The blood drained from her face, but her eyes, those saintly eyes, narrowed into slits of pure, calculating hatred. She understood the implication faster than my parents did. The power hadn't just shifted, it had undergone a seismic, irreversible realignment. "You're lying," my mother finally whispered. The words were faint, a desperate plea for me to deny it. "I'm not," I said. I walked back to the dining table and placed my briefcase on it. I clicked open the latches. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. "I'm many things you've accused me of, Mom. I'm quiet. I'm private. I'm materialistic, if that's what you want to call building a life for myself. But I am not a liar." I pulled out the first file. "This," I said, "is the default notice from the bank. And this," I added, sliding a second, thicker document next to it, "is the executed transfer of note from the bank to AP Holdings, LLC, a limited liability company." AP, What? My father murmured, staring at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. AP Holdings. It's one of my companies, I said simply. It's the holding company I use for my real estate investments. As of December 14th, I am your mortgage holder. The house is the collateral. You are, in effect, my tenants. My mother's knees audibly buckled. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself, her knuckles white. Sierra, however, found her voice, and it was dripping with venom. You planned this, you let us. You let us stew in this, knowing you were going to steal our home. Steal it? I let out a short, cold laugh. Sierra, I just saved it. The bank was foreclosing. The auction was in 3 weeks. You would have been homeless, all of you. I gestured to the papers. I paid the note in full, in cash. Something you, with your humanitarian efforts, couldn't do. Something Mom and Dad, after funding your fantasy life for 2 decades, couldn't do. So, what is this, Isabella? My father said, his voice quiet and shaky, but with an underlying thread of anger. A power play? You bought your childhood home just to what? To humiliate us. I bought it to protect my only real set, I said, my gaze sweeping over them. I'm done. I'm done being the invisible one. I'm done being the reliable one you only call in a crisis. And I am done funding this. I pulled out the second file, the P-ICE report. What is that? My mother asked, her voice trembling. This, I said, is the due diligence I was talking about. I opened it and turned it to face them. The first page was a clear, high-resolution photograph of Sierra, laughing, holding a cocktail on a balcony overlooking a pristine, turquoise ocean. The timestamp was from 6 weeks ago, when she was supposedly on a desperate fundraising trip. That's taken out of context. Sierra lunged for the photo, but I pulled it back. Is it? What about the 990s for the Global Hearth Initiative? Shall we go through them? 85% administrative overhead. Consulting fees paid to a shell LLC in your own name. Travel expenses that match dollar for dollar your Instagram feed from Bali, Paris, and Tuscany. Stop it, Sierra shrieked. Stop it, you're making it all up. Am I? I pulled out the next page. It was a copy of a bank transfer from my parents' joint savings account for $25,000, dated 8 months ago. This was for the water well in Guatemala, wasn't it? I asked. I then slid another paper next to it. This is the travel manifest for your mission trip, first-class ticket. And this is the folio from your hotel, the La Reunion Antigua Golf Resort. Did you build the well by the 18th hole, Sierra? My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked at Sierra, her eyes wide with the first dawning horror of realization. Sierra, honey, what is this? She's lying, Mom. Sierra was hysterical now, her face blotchy and red. The saintly mask was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. She's photoshopping this. She's a monster. She's always hated me. She was lashing out, just as Aunt Clara said she would. Poorly executed threats. Obvious lies. She was confirming her own fraud with every word she spoke. I don't hate you, Sierra, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. I'm just tired of you. I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of the performance. And I'm tired of you bleeding our parents dry. I looked at my father. He was staring at the hotel folio, his face pale as ash. He hadn't said a word. He was just processing. The first-class ticket, the golf resort, the dates. Matthew, my mother whispered, turning to him. My father slowly raised his head. He looked at Sira, his little saint. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw the blinding, worshipful pride in his eyes die, replaced by a look of cold, profound disillusionment. "Serafina," he said, his voice barely audible, "is this true?" "Daddy, no, she's twisting it. It's complicated. You don't understand nonprofit work." "Is it true?" he repeated, his voice gaining a hard edge I'd never heard. "The golf resort, the first-class ticket, while you were taking that from us." Sira's desperate, lying eyes met my father's newly hardened ones. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She had no more lies. She was caught. This was the moment, the shattering of the illusion, the revelation of the truth. My mother was clutching her chest, breathing in short, shallow gasps. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. And Sira just stood there, exposed, the fraudulent scaffolding of her entire life collapsing around her. "So," I said, closing the file, "now we're all on the same page. Shall we discuss the terms of your new lease?" The immediate aftermath of the reveal was chaos. My mother, Rachel, collapsed onto the chair, her sobs high and thin. My home, she's taking my home." "I'm not taking it, Mom," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I saved it, but it is legally my property, which means the dynamic you're used to, it's over." Sira, seeing my mother's distress, tried to rally. She rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her. "SHH, Mom, it's okay. We'll fight this. She can't do this. We'll get a lawyer. She tricked you. She tricked the bank." It was a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control, to paint me as the villain and herself as the protector. But the spell was broken. My father, Matthew, didn't move. He just stared at Sira, his gaze cold. You lied to us all this time. The grants, the missions, it was for golf." The word came out with such profound disgust it seemed to shock him. "Daddy, it wasn't. It's not what you think," Sira cried, abandoning Mom to plead her case with him. It was a donor meeting. They expect a certain level of what, Sira?" I cut in. "Fraud. Did they expect you to use the money Mom and Dad sent for a water well to pay for your hotel room? A well, by the way," I added, pulling another paper from my fill. That I had my investigator check on. "The village you partnered with, they've never heard of you or the Global Hearth Initiative." This was the irrefutable proof. Not just extravagance, but a complete fabrication. A non-existent project tied to a non-existent village. My father flinched as if I'd struck him. He looked at the paper, then back at Sira, his face crumpled. "All these years, we bragged about you to our friends, to Isabella." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrifying shame. We gave you everything, Sira. We there's nothing left." But, Sira stammered, looking between her two broken parents, her support system dissolving before her eyes. The tears were real now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. Her entire life, her source of income, her identity, it was all gone. You did this," she suddenly shrieked, whirling on me. You snake, you've been waiting for this. You've been plotting to destroy me." "No, Sira," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I've been working while you were plotting, while you were building your brand. I was building a business, a real one, and now the bills have come due." My mother, finally processing the full extent of Sira's deception, let out a low moan. The money, Matthew, the The retirement. It's all gone. Yes, Rachel, I said gently, turning to her. It's gone. You gave it to her. But what about the house? She whispered, her eyes wide with terror, finally looking at me as her only lifeline. The house is safe, I said, because I own it, which brings us to the new rules. I laid it out. I wasn't going to be cruel, but I was going to be firm. This was no longer a family home, it was an asset. Rule 1, I said, you can stay here for now, you will pay rent. Rent, my father whispered aghast. Yes, a nominal fee, $500 a month, just enough to cover the property taxes and insurance which I will now be paying. You are retirees on a fixed income. You can afford that. And Sierra? My mother asked, her voice trembling as she looked at her favored daughter. Rule 2, I said, my gaze locking with my sister's. She's out. What? Sierra and my mother screamed in unison. She's out, I repeated, unblinking. She is 41 years old. She is a thief and a fraud. She will not live in my house under my roof for free one single day longer. She has until the end of the month, 30 days, to find a new place to live. And, I added, a job, a real one. You can't, my mother wailed, rising to her feet. She's your sister, she has nowhere to go. That is not my problem, Mom. That is the consequence of her actions. She has been living a lie, and the lie is over. She can sell her designer clothes. She can sell the car you bought her. But she is not staying here. Sierra was hyperventilating, her face pale with shock and fury. She was so used to being coddled, to being seen as a fragile, precious thing, that the idea of actual, tangible consequences was shattering her. And Rule 3, I said, looking at all of them. The Global Hearth Initiative is to be dissolved. Immediately, I have a lawyer on retainer. He will oversee the entire process. Any remaining assets, which I doubt there are, will be liquidated. You will not be allowed to solicit another penny from anyone ever again. If you refuse, I will turn this entire file, I tapped the PI report, over to the IRS and the State Attorney General. It's your choice, Sierra, dissolution or prison. The word prison hung in the air, cold and sharp. Sierra collapsed, all the fight gone, all the performance drained away. She just crumpled into a heap on the floor, sobbing. Not the pretty, performative sobs. These were the ugly, raw, gasping sobs of utter defeat. My mother looked at her, then at me, her face torn. But she didn't rush to comfort her. She was frozen, trapped between the daughter she worshipped and the daughter she had ignored, the one who now held all the cards. My father, Matthew, just sat there, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking in silent, racking sobs. The illusion was dead. The family, as he knew it, was dead. The spell was finally, irrevocably broken. Thanksgiving, 1 year later. The scene could not have been more different. The year had been a brutal, cleansing fire. Sierra, true to my word, had been forced out. The last I'd heard, she was living in a small studio apartment 2 towns over, working as a receptionist at a dental office. She had dissolved the nonprofit. The threat of legal action had been more than enough. She had not spoken to me since that day. My relationship with my parents, Rachel and Matthew, had been structured. They paid their $500 rent on the first of every month via an automatic bank transfer. I visited. We had stilted, careful conversations. We did not talk about Sierra. We did not talk about the incident. We talked about the weather. We talked about the news. My father had 6 months in called me. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, Isabella, he'd choked out. I I was blind and I'm proud of you, I'm so proud of you. I looked up your company. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. My mother was harder. She was polite. She was grateful. But I could see the resentment simmering just beneath the surface, the wound of her broken idol, Sira, still festering. But today was different. I hadn't planned it. I had invited my Aunt Clara to fly in for the holiday, and my mother, in a fit of something, guilt perhaps, or a misguided attempt at reconciliation, had invited Sira. Sira arrived last. She was diminished. The glowing, saintly aura was gone. She was just a 42-year-old woman in a rumpled coat, her hair dull, her eyes flat. She looked ordinary. The dinner was tense. My parents and I made painfully polite conversation. Aunt Clara, sharp as ever, watched everyone like a hawk. Sira just picked at her food, silent, radiating a sullen anger. And then my mother made her move. "Well," Rachel said, setting her fork down with a clatter, "this is nice to have the whole family together." "Is it, Rachel?" Aunt Clara asked, her voice mild. My mother shot her a look. "Yes, it is, and, Sira dear, I'm so sorry for everything. Your sister, Isabella, she was so harsh." I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. Harsh. My father winced. "Rachel, don't, please." "No, Matthew," my mother said, her voice rising with a year's worth of suppressed resentment. "It's true, we made mistakes, but she took our home, she threw you out," she said, looking at Sira. "It was cruel, all that money, and she couldn't find it in her heart to just forgive, to just help her family." This was it, the final showdown, the public airing. She was trying to paint me as the villain one last time. Sira's head came up, a spark of her old self in her eyes. "She's right, you enjoyed it, Isabella, you enjoyed destroying me." I looked at my mother, at my sister, the two people who had built their identities on a shared delusion, and I felt nothing, no anger, no hurt, just pity. I set my glass down. "Harsh," I repeated, my voice perfectly calm. "You think what I did was harsh." I turned to my mother. You were this close." I held my fingers an inch apart, to being homeless, to losing everything. "Because of her lies, I didn't take your home, Mom. I own your home. I am the reason you are sitting at this table in this house eating this turkey. That's not harsh. That's grace." Then I turned to Sira. "And you? Destroyed you? I gave you the one thing you never had, Sira, a consequence. I gave you a chance to have a real life, not a performance. Your destruction was just the curtain coming down on your terrible play. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" Sira sputtered, her face turning red. "Thanking you for turning my own parents against me." "They turned against you when you stole from them, you idiot." Aunt Clara snapped, her patience gone. "When you took their retirement money and spent it at a golf resort. My brother," she said, looking at Matthew, "worked for 45 years. And you parasitic, you drank it, you wore it, you wasted it on nothing." "Enough," Sira shrieked. It was the climax from the title, the moment I had been waiting for. The final, explosive loss of control. You bitch." She grabbed her glass of red wine and, with a scream of pure, undiluted rage, threw it straight at me. I didn't flinch, I didn't even move. But my father did. In a motion so fast I barely registered it, Matthew shot up from his chair, knocking his own plate to the floor, and intercepted the glass. It shattered against his arm. Red wine, turkey, and glass sprayed across the table, all over him. A silence. Sierra froze, her hand still in the air, her mouth open in a perfect O of shock. My mother let out a strangled sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Matthew. My father stood there, dripping, his arm bleeding from a small cut. He looked down at the mess on his shirt, then at his arm, and then, very slowly, he raised his head and looked at his youngest daughter. His little saint. Get out, he whispered, his voice shaking with a cold fury I had never, ever heard. Daddy, I didn't. It was for her, Sierra stammered, pointing at me. I said, my father roared, and this time the entire room shook. Get out of this house. He grabbed her by the arm, yanked her out of her chair, and physically dragged her to the front door. You are nothing to me. Do you hear me? Nothing. He shoved her out onto the front porch, into the cold November air, and slammed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the final punctuation. He stood there, breathing heavily, his back to us. My mother was weeping, her head in her hands. Oh, God, Matthew. Oh, God. Aunt Clara calmly picked up her napkin and began dabbing at a spot of wine on the tablecloth. My F. Ather turned around. He looked at my mother, whose face was a mask of terror. He looked at me, sitting there, untouched. And finally, he looked down at his ruined shirt and his bleeding arm. He walked not to my mother, but to me. He stood before me, the patriarch broken and remade. Isabella, he said, his voice raw, are you all right? It was the first time in my life he had ever put me first. It was the first time he had ever protected me. I nodded, unable to speak. He looked at the chaos, the shattered glass, the spilled wine, the hysterical sobs from my mother, and then back at me. He had made his choice. The final, triumphant break. The delusion was not just broken, it was annihilated. The downfall of Serafina was not loud. It was quiet and absolute. After my father threw her out, she disappeared. There were no more calls, no more attempts at manipulation. It was as if she had evaporated. My Aunt Clara's lawyer handled the final dissolution of the Global Hearth Initiative, and the file was sent to the IRS. While I never inquired about the legal specifics, I knew that her days of living off fabricated goodwill were permanently over. She was, as my father had declared, done. The months following that disastrous Thanksgiving were a period of quiet, painful rebuilding. My mother, Rachel, was the most broken. Her entire world, propped up for decades by the twin pillars of Sierra's sainthood and her own perceived martyrdom, had collapsed. She was forced to see her life, her choices, and her children as they truly were. She and I started small. I would come over on Sundays. We would sit in the garden. For the first month, we barely spoke. But then, one day, she looked at me, her eyes clear for the first time, and said, "Your roses, they're beautiful, Isabella. I never noticed what a good gardener you are." It was a start. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement. It was her seeing me, not the ATM, not the boring one, but just me. It would take years. It would never be perfect. But the poison was gone. My father, Matthew, on the other hand, sought reconciliation with a clumsy, heartfelt urgency. He called me. He asked about my work. He wanted to know about archival paper, about pH-neutral adhesives, about the logistics of my supply chain. He subscribed to my company's newsletter. He was, in his late 60s, finally trying to be a father to the daughter he had. One afternoon, he came to my apartment, hat in hand. I'm selling the old boat," he said quietly. It's not much, but I want to start paying you back for the mortgage, for what we did. I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life enabling a fantasy, now trying to confront a harsh reality. Dad, I said, keep the boat. You don't owe me money. But I have to do something. You already are, I said. You're here, you're talking to me, that's enough. He wept, and I held him. It was a reconciliation built not on a grand gesture, but on the quiet admission of his own failures. As for me, I finally felt at peace. The house, I owned it, but it wasn't a weapon anymore. It was just a house. I had my lawyer restructure the rent. It was no longer a payment. It was an allowance from me to them, automatically deposited into their account, covering the taxes, insurance, and utilities. It was a gift, freely given, not an obligation, extracted. I took the burden from them, but this time I did it on my own terms, with my eyes wide open. My company continued to thrive. I opened a new restoration center in London. My work, which my family had dismissed as a hobby, had not only given me my fortune, but it had also given me my strength. The same meticulous patience it took to restore a 17th century book was the same patience I had used to dismantle my sister's web of lies and rebuild my family. The last I heard from Aunt Clara was that Serafina was working as a cashier. She had not, apparently, made for a very good receptionist. The real world, it turned out, was not impressed by her performance.